Sauron. To some, a tyrant, to others, an ally. This powerful being who left an indelible mark on the history of Middle-earth, especially the last 6,000 years. Where did he come from? What was his purpose? What did he do from the moment he arrived in Aulë until his final defeat? If you're ready, let us return to the beginning of days. Sauron's creation and early days. The spirit who would much later be called Sauron came into existence in the timeless halls by the will of Eru Ilúvatar. Just like many other powerful or less powerful spirits, even before Aulë, the world upon which Middle-earth lies was created. And like all of the Maia, he participated in the great music, Ainur, that brought Aulë into being. The power granted to him by Eru was significant. However, it still fell short of the most powerful spirits who would later be known as the Valar, such as Manwë, Ulmo, and Aulë. Although he contributed to the great music, his influence was not decisive, unlike Ulmo, who shaped the seas. Yet the core factor that shaped his character was not this relatively lesser power. Sauron never questioned the power he had been granted. For him, what mattered was how and for what purpose he used that power. And it was at this point that he began to differ from other Maia. Service. To Aulë, an obsession with order. It is not definitively known what kind of being Sauron was during the spring of Aulë, the time before Melkor's dark shadow fell upon the earth. But based on his first name, Mairon, which means the Admirable, we can assume he was a graceful and orderly being who inspired awe. During this time, Sauron served the Valar Aulë. Aulë was the smith who shaped the world. He created its mountains and its earth. It was at this point that Sauron's obsession with order began to fully manifest. He believed everything should function according to a certain system. Regardless of the source of that order, whether good or evil, what mattered was perfection and efficiency. Therefore, assisting Aulë, who worked to establish order, was quite meaningful. However, in time, this obsession would lead him away from the order of the Valar and into the service of Melkor, Morgoth. Joining Melkor and rising in Angband, Sauron's departure from the order of the Valar began with his internal conflict. The idea that order would be left to the elves and men was unacceptable to him. In his eyes, these weak beings could not sustain perfect order. This line of thought gradually directed him toward Melkor's ranks. The exact time when Sauron joined Melkor is not certain, but it is believed to have occurred either before or shortly after Melkor destroyed the two great lamps. Some sources claim that Sauron was Melkor's spy even before reaching Amon. Others argue he never went to Valinor at all, and thus never saw the two trees. Regardless, he became Melkor's most loyal servant. The Valar didn't see this shift as a great loss, which marked their first major mistake. They underestimated Sauron's power and potential. When Melkor was defeated and captured at Utumno, his first great northern stronghold, Sauron managed to retain his power. While the Valar laid siege to Utumno with all their might, they did not give enough importance to Angband or Sauron. As a result, Sauron rebuilt and fortified Angband in Melkor's absence and expanded his orc armies. Thus, when Melkor returned, he was greeted by a ready army. The First Age, Sauron's Wars and Shape-Shifting Power. During the First Age of the Sun, Sauron's activity was relatively minor at first. Angband was under a prolonged siege by the Noldor Elves. However, once Melkor broke the siege with the Battle of Sudden Flame, Dagor Bragolach, Sauron began to take a more active role. It was during this age that the elves began calling him Sauron, meaning the abhorred. His previous name had been Mairon, meaning the admirable. This change symbolized his fall. He was now a servant of darkness. On Melkor's orders, Sauron led an assault on the watchtower of Minas Tirith, not to be confused with the Gondor city of the same name. Located on an island in the river Sirion, he captured it, and it became a den for werewolves and vampires. During this period, Sauron's powers of sorcery and illusion came to the forefront. A clear example of this is how he tricked Gorlim, a follower of Barahir, by showing him a deceptive vision and luring him into betrayal. He also captured Beren and Finrod, imprisoning them, and Finrod eventually died in Sauron's dungeons. One of the most remarkable episodes was Sauron's battle with Huan, the Hound of Valar Orome. In this confrontation, Sauron transformed first into a giant wolf, then a serpent, and finally a vampire bat. Ultimately, Huan overpowered him, and Sauron fled. This moment marks the last recorded instance of Sauron transforming into animal forms. It is believed that he may have expended much of his shape-shifting power during this conflict. The end of the First Age and Sauron's escape. The First Age ended with the War of Wrath, in which Melkor was definitively defeated and cast into the void. Sauron, however, was offered a chance to surrender by the Herald of the Valar, Eönwë. Fearing Eönwë's wrath, Sauron refused and chose to flee instead. This was the Valar's second major mistake. They once again failed to eliminate Sauron when they had the chance. The Second Age. Sauron's rise and the plan of the Rings of Power. The early centuries of the Second Age were largely peaceful. After Melkor's defeat, the Valar seemed to withdraw from direct involvement in Middle-earth. During this time, the island kingdom of Númenor was established as a gift to the faithful men who flourished and grew strong. Sauron, however, spent this time observing and waiting for the right moment to act again. Around the year 1000 of the Second Age, he journeyed to what would become Mordor and began building Barad-dûr. He gathered scattered orc tribes and constructed a new fortress. Sauron had learned a crucial lesson from the First Age. The elves would never willingly serve him. Thus, instead of open war, he opted for deception. He assumed a beautiful form and introduced himself as Annatar, Lord of Gifts, claiming to be a messenger of the Valar. His goal was to gain the elves' trust and persuade them to forge magical rings. In Eregion, the elven smiths, particularly Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor, were captivated by Annatar's knowledge and promises. Together, they forged many magical rings, including 16 rings of power of considerable might. However, Celebrimbor secretly crafted 3 additional rings without Sauron's involvement. These 3, untouched by Sauron, could not be corrupted by him directly. Sauron's master plan was now clear: to forge one ring that would dominate all others. He poured a great portion of his own power into the ring, forging it in the fires of Mount Doom near Barad-dûr. The one ring was created to control the wielders of the other rings of power. However, the plan began to unravel immediately. As soon as Sauron donned the One Ring, the elves became aware of his true intentions and removed their rings. Realizing his failure, Sauron spent the next 90 years preparing for war. The destruction of Eregion and the Great War. In the year 1693 of the Second Age, Sauron launched his campaign. He attacked Eregion, captured Celebrimbor, and tortured him in an attempt to discover the location of the 3 rings. Celebrimbor refused and was killed. Sauron seized the 16 rings of power and distributed 7 of them to the dwarves and 9 to men. The rings had little effect on the dwarves but proved devastating to men, transforming them into the Nazgûl, Sauron's most feared and loyal servants. Now, Sauron's intentions were unmistakable. He sought dominion over Middle-earth. He launched a large-scale offensive toward Lindon, home of High King Gil-galad. But this time, help came from an unexpected quarter, Númenor. Gil-galad called upon Númenor, and their army arrived with overwhelming force. In the resulting conflict, known as the War of the Elves and Sauron, Sauron was defeated and forced to retreat to Mordor. He remained silent for nearly 500 years. Sauron's plan to destroy Númenor from within after his military defeat. Sauron devised a new plan. If he couldn't conquer by force, he would do so through deception. The last king of Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn, heard of Sauron's claim that he was Lord of the Earth. Infuriated, he set out with the greatest fleet ever assembled to humble Sauron. But instead of resisting, Sauron surrendered without a fight. This was no act of weakness. It was strategy. Brought to Númenor as a prisoner, Sauron quickly gained influence over the king. He whispered in Ar-Pharazôn's ear, divided the people, and soon became revered as a god. Under his guidance, a temple to Melkor was built, and human sacrifices began. During a thunderstorm, lightning struck the temple, but Sauron emerged unscathed and laughed. This further convinced the people of his divinity. Over the next 50 years, Sauron corrupted Númenor from within. Ultimately, Ar-Pharazôn was convinced to invade Valinor, believing he could seize immortality. But the Valar did not sit idly by. Eru Ilúvatar himself intervened. Númenor was sunk beneath the sea, destroyed in a cataclysm. Only the faithful, a small group of loyal Númenorians, survived. Sauron's physical body perished in the downfall, but his spirit returned to Mordor because the One Ring was still intact. His connection to the ring preserved his existence. The Third Age, the Shadow returns. At the end of the Second Age, Sauron was defeated by the last alliance of elves and men, led by Elendil and Gil-galad. Both leaders perished in battle. Elendil's son, Isildur, used the broken sword Narsil to cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand. Sauron's body was destroyed, his spirit scattered. But this was not the end. Isildur took the ring for himself instead of destroying it. Soon after, he was ambushed by orcs and slain. The ring was lost in the river Anduin and remained hidden for many centuries. Thus began the Third Age, an era where Sauron was bodiless, but not gone. Sauron's spirit returns. Throughout the Third Age, Sauron's spirit slowly regained power. Around the year 1000, a dark presence appeared in Dol Guldur, a fortress in Mirkwood. The elves could not identify the evil, but grew suspicious. In 2063, Gandalf visited Dol Guldur and confirmed that this dark power was indeed Sauron. But Sauron, not yet strong enough to face the Astari, fled eastward. This marked the beginning of the Watchful Peace, a deceptive period of quiet that lasted 400 years. In 2460, Sauron returned to Dol Guldur. That same year, the One Ring resurfaced, found by a creature named Gollum. The reappearance of the ring coincided with Sauron gathering his strength again. The return of the Nazgûl and the rebuilding of Mordor. Starting around 1300, Sauron's servants, the Nazgûl, began to reappear. Kingdoms of men, particularly Ainur in the north, were weakened and eventually destroyed by the Witch King of Angmar. In 2951, Sauron openly declared himself and began rebuilding Barad-dûr. Mordor once again became a fortress of shadow. Meanwhile, the ring, which had remained with Gollum, was found by Bilbo Baggins during his journey to the Lonely Mountain. Unaware of its full power, Bilbo brought it back to the Shire. The War of the Ring, final confrontation. Bilbo held the ring for 60 years before passing it on to Frodo Baggins. When Gandalf realized the truth, that this was the One Ring, it was almost too late. Sauron had already mobilized Mordor. The Nazgûl were dispatched. Sauron believed the ring would be used against him by a powerful enemy, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, or Aragorn. He never considered that his enemies might try to destroy it. His mind, obsessed with power and order, could not comprehend the rejection of such strength. But once again, it was Sauron's pride that led to his downfall. Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, through immense hardship, reached Mount Doom. Though Frodo could not destroy the ring, at the last moment Gollum, consumed by obsession, bit the ring from Frodo's hand. In his ecstasy, he stumbled and fell into the fires, destroying the ring. With the One Ring unmade, Sauron's power collapsed. His spirit, no longer anchored, was utterly dispersed. Never again would he return. Epilogue: from tyranny to legend. Sauron's story is not merely that of a Dark Lord. He was once a being who sought perfection, order, and structure. His fall came not from initial evil intent, but from obsession and inability to accept that control could be relinquished. Ignored by the Valar, underestimated by men, misunderstood by elves, Sauron became the architect of millennia of darkness in Middle-earth. Yet ironically, from the shadow he cast, the greatest heroism and light emerged. It was through his tyranny that Middle-earth's legendary tales of courage, sacrifice, and hope were born.